I can't even imagine how much money developers and contractors must be losing due to delays in construction, and that must be a fraction of the costs at Gateway 3 or handover if they're refused permission to occupy. Because property and construction are now regulated industries, we're expected to deliver much better records of what we've installed. The problem is that even now, after all the new legislation, asset teams are still having to spend £50,000 or £100,000 commissioning surveys of brand new buildings to find out what was installed. A lot of dedicated people have worked hard to improve processes with standards and guidance, so why is the information asset teams need to keep people safe still missing? This graphic's more than 10 years old, but it clearly describes the points at which information exchange should be checked during the process of design and construction using COBie, which is the International Data Schema for handover information. So why is that important? Well, who wants to manually check thousands of uncoordinated documents and drawings? COBie moves validation from being a tedious manual task to enabling automation, and it's a perfect foundation for machine learning and AI. If you check most contracts, you'll probably find that COBie has been specified to progressively validate the information that asset teams need is being delivered, and reject it if it isn't. But many are leaving that to the very end, by which time it's too late to fix. It's even worse than that. We've been on several projects where the information manager specified what was required, but the cost managers de-scoped it from the work package because it appeared to save them £50,000 on a £50 million scheme. On one of those, we thought we had a backstop because we got the O&M compiler to agree to include COBie references as metadata on the documents. We then discovered that the client's commercial teams had de-scoped that one as well. In both cases, nobody told us, or even asked if it was important. As you'll see later, that's going to cost them much more to put it right going forward. One of the team trying to check all the handover information said it's like being an accountant 30 years ago when clients would rock up with bin bags of receipts asking them to create a set of accounts for the revenue. The problem is that most firms are still following the old working practices, transferring the risk of information collection down to work packages and not monitoring the deliverables as a whole. Building safety managers or FMs shouldn't be expected to know which work packages include the assets for each system. Dame Judith tried to overcome this silo-based thinking by what she called the Golden Thread, and that's been backed up by legislation that makes some of those established working practices illegal. Lots of people claim to be providing the golden thread of building safety, but how many are actually delivering, or even understand what it really means? At its heart, the golden thread's about connectability, assets to systems, systems to the spaces and the people they're protecting. Just like an accounting system, all the information needs to be properly coded for the accounts to balance. And just like accounting, one faulty transaction can throw everything out. If the transactions aren't coded and referenced properly, the books will never balance. If the many different work packages use different floor and space references, we've got chaos. I appreciate that might sound daft, but it happens all the time. We've been involved since the very beginning, and we've developed a lot of practical ways of delivering much better information that helps make homes and offices safer. So we formed a cross-disciplinary group of people that are on the receiving end of handovers, so we can provide clients and their supply chains with an industry best practice standard for what projects should provide and what clients should look for when they're auditing handover information. We're starting with a very simple baseline, a low bar that everyone can achieve irrespective of what software they're using. We've named it the Golden Thread Taskforce, and we can do the boring bit of checking that data protocols have been followed so that everything's properly connected. The task force will form a peer group that can assess the competency and commitment of new clients and their contractors and propose them for a Golden Thread Aware badge, which we expect to become a valued accreditation. We ran a poll of our members and it's clear why submissions are missing vital information. The industry is blaming the regulator for delays, but the solutions are in our own hands. I think this next question provides the answer. If board members still don't understand their legal responsibilities, the rest of the business is going to struggle. Despite this, some individuals are taking the initiative, using low-cost 360 cameras to capture the real internal layouts. In this case, it picked up an opening in the firewall that isn't shown in the fire plan. Firefighters going into a smoke-filled building would need to know that. In fact, the records had several different layouts to pick from. Does it really matter which one they give to the fire brigades? As one of our team said, it only matters when it really matters. Landlords are telling us that contractors are reluctant to provide as-built drawings, presumably because they can't guarantee they're right. This makes the 360 a simple but really important part of the Golden Thread. Building safety managers or asset surveyors can work remotely, walking down virtual corridors, tagging assets, fire doors, lifts, and here we've got an automatic opening vent. And we can also record that this one is controlled by an actuator. And as we spin around, we can tag the smoke detector. The location of dry risers is clearly important to the fire brigade, and the electrical cupboard can be opened so an electrical expert can record what it contains without having to visit site. Findability is critical, so in this case the Golden Thread automatically connects the dry riser in this asset list to the view in the 360, making it so much easier to find. I don't think the digital record side of building regulations has ever been thoroughly policed. A lot of people saw it as red tape that they needed to get around, and then we saw the impact. BIM for Housing was asked to help define what asset information we need to prevent another disaster. We've run hundreds of workshops bringing together thousands of experts to agree what information is really needed to protect people. Joining the Golden Thread Taskforce is free, but you'll need to dedicate some time reading and understanding the publications we've produced, and also demonstrating to the peer group that you're competent. Experts on safety critical assets like fire alarms and smoke control worked in teams, often alongside competitors, to share their knowledge with clients and other disciplines, and the next generation. Over 100 experts and fire doors worked on this guidance for several months, and we're about to do the same for dampers, penetration seals and cavity barriers. Our goal was to ensure projects were creating the key information in a form that the regulators could easily verify. This helps avoid expensive delays at each gateway, which would delay construction, completion and occupation of the buildings, which would be financially catastrophic for everyone involved. So, what should we do? We call it the Golden Thread of Information because we need to think of the whole building as a system that's made up of several interdependent systems, each of which is critical to overall safety. Each system includes individual assets that need inspecting, but that's not enough. Let's look at a scenario where a fire breaks out in a kitchen. What's protecting people from suffocating in smoke-filled corridors and stairs? The first system is compartmentation. The fire doors might be perfect, but if the penetration seals or dampers fail, people could die. The Golden Thread needs to connect all of the assets that form the compartment wall so it can be checked as a complete system. That's why the fire safety regulations require the location of each asset. If contractors fail to provide the location of all the penetration seals or dampers, we don't have a Golden Thread. No single system is infallible, so the other systems are installed to mitigate risks. And when there's an incident, they all need to work. So the Golden Thread needs to know where each of the key assets are located and what's connected to what. Buildings are complicated with lots of installers capturing lots of golden threads in models, drawings, Excel files and documents. In this case, the installer has added a QR code to the door, which can tie back to a spatial model that locates each door. In this case, the door has a dynamic connection to BIM data that shows what information is still missing. It's also connected to the manufacturer's product data, but the critical thing here is the relationship between the fire door, the fire wall, and the spaces they're both protecting. The Golden Thread has to run into operations. Inspections are likely to be done by different specialists using different software, so it's important they're recorded against the same unique asset to build a history. All of the inspection apps need to locate their pins on the same floor plan, or the Golden Thread's broken. That's why we need the locations of the asset types, along with the information about the products that were installed and who installed them. It's clearly set out in the legislation, but who's enforcing it? It's like imposing speed restrictions without speed cameras. Anyone involved in the industry knows there's some information will be missing at handover, but you only find out what's missing when you look for it. Clients and contractors are under huge pressure to get the certificate of completion so they can occupy the building. So what do you think happens? The regulators know this, so they wrote this into the legislation. The client has to confirm that they've checked all the fire critical asset information and they've got everything they need. And the contractor has to sign that their subbies have provided everything and that the client has provided them with that declaration. Now these declarations are statutory, so signing it without being able to demonstrate it's been properly checked would be a criminal offence. That risk of prosecution remains in place for years after handover. And if the building's sold, the buyer inherits the responsibility of the fire and emergency file, so they have to ensure it's complete. Could you imagine the drop in value that could lead to once investors realise the level of risk they could be taking on? Here's a good example why the responsible person needs to know where the fire dampers are installed and what type of wall they've gone into. If there's a fire that causes this ductwork to collapse, the responsible person needs to know that it's designed to break away from the damper and not pull it out of the wall, letting smoke through. Here's an example of how a proper golden thread can make that a doddle. On this new college project, JJ Rattigan and Sodexo used different software applications but applied data standards to ensure everything was glued together. In this case, the contractor included the fire dampers in their BIM model and used standard naming and classification that connects everything and makes it more findable. The assets are connected to the manufacturer's model numbers, in this case a Lindab WK25, which is automatically connected to the product library. That's the real value of all these boring data standards. Here we see the detailed product data and the maintenance requirements. And the FM's presented with a simple floor plan that pinpoints where that individual damper is, which compartment wall it's part of, and which spaces it's protecting. Another way of finding that damper is from the asset schedule. It's great that we've got the space reference, but this golden thread does something even better. It provides a direct connection between the asset in the schedule and automatically zooms to its location in the as-built 360 photo, so we don't get mixed up with the other three dampers in this space. The data connectivity brings us back to the manufacturer's product library and a list of the important documents. In this case, the Declaration of Performance. Here we have the 72-page operating and maintenance instructions for that specific fire damper. It can be bookmarked to make it easier to find the information individuals need when they need it. The product library can also record any other buildings where that specific Lindab fire damper has been installed. Can you imagine how much easier that will make mandatory occurrence reporting? One version of the truth and easy to keep up to date. The key message here isn't the various software applications the contractors used. It's the way properly structured data can automatically connect assets to systems and documents, so we have an auditable golden thread that's easily maintained. Here's an example from a different project, a residential block, where the handover information is at the other end of the scale. This page is from the fire safety manual and it tells us they're internal. That's helpful, isn't it? They're somewhere in the building. We need assets to be findable, so we need at least what space they're in, and ideally their XY coordinates. It's small wonder that FMs often miss inspecting some of the fire dampers because they don't know where they are. They sometimes maintain fire doors that aren't in fire compartments and miss the ones that are. It's not really their fault. Too much information can be as bad as too little. For example, this fire stopping contractors provide very detailed records of more than 1,300 penetration seals. Each individual seal has its own record and an image of the architect's compartmentation drawing with a pin locating the seal. I'm not criticising the contractor. They've probably done what was asked of them and have even included a GPS coordinate, which seems impressive. But I'm struggling to understand how that enables building control, an asset manager, or a responsible person to check all the assets that make up a firewall. It seems to me that they'd need to open dozens of individual drawings and try and cross-reference them with the hundreds of other drawings and schedules that tell us where fire doors and dampers are. Impossible. So they won't bother. Believe me, trying to do it retrospectively is impossible. The handover records should be clear and simple to understand and in a format that can populate their CAFM systems. The information might be somewhere in the O&M, but if your kid's life depended on it, would you accept a contractor's assurance that it's in there somewhere? Or would you get them to show you? In my experience, most main contractors would struggle to find it in the O&M, so the client doesn't really stand a chance. To be clear, we're not saying that all O&Ms are bad. There's some very good providers, but something this important shouldn't be a lottery. We've invested weeks and months going through the 2,500 drawings and documents in this O&M, but different asset types are in different work packages, using different names, and the descriptions for floors and spaces weren't consistent. Assets should be grouped into systems because trying to piece that together afterwards is a nightmare. It's like being asked to do a jigsaw puzzle without being given the box lid. But the pressure's on everyone to get that completion certificate, and everybody knows that the regulator's unlikely to prosecute, and even if they do, the penalties are likely to be a fraction of the loss of rental income. So, what do you think happens? Okay, we know we've got a problem, so how do we fix it? Despite our efforts to make everything digital and connected, most of the critical asset information is delivered in CAD files and documents that aren't connected, so no golden thread. It's a nightmare for clients to check and for their asset managers to keep up to date. We've developed a standardised process that everybody can follow, connect the assets and systems in an asset information model and identify what's missing. It's much better if the subcontractors get it right first time, so we're working to provide all the specialist contractors with much clearer specification of what they must produce, validate it, and use 360 photos to add anything that gets missed. The key is for the industry to agree the detail of what must be provided and for clients to audit their projects against that. By standardising that basic information for all buildings that need fire safety information, supply chains stand a much better chance of getting it right. We're very keen not to reinvent the wheel, so take a look at this. The UK government created some really useful data standards for property and FM. Wouldn't it be great if everyone used them for floors, locations, spaces and asset data? It's perfect for Kobe. So that's what we're doing. We're not asking anyone to use different software. Just use what they have to produce schedules, drawings and documents, but make sure they're referenced properly so that other people can find what they need easily. The fire and emergency file should tell us where the AOVs are and which ones have got actuators, which doors are fire doors, which have door closers or retainers, and which are connected to the fire alarm system. You shouldn't have to spend hours trawling through work packages to find what you need. By following a standard audit process, duty holders will be able to demonstrate they've taken reasonable steps to check that the Regulation 38 information was provided, and where something's missing, flag up the potential risk, prioritise it, and record a plan to backfill it later. The Golden Thread Taskforce provides duty holders with an expert team that's independent from the pressures of the project to ensure that everyone's safe from prosecution or much worse. It also makes financial sense. Once investors understand the risks, selling a property without a golden thread will be like selling a car without an MOT and service history. We've now shared this with the leading fire industry associations, and they're all on board. And so are many manufacturers who are keen to see the golden thread turn into a reality. If you're a designer or consultant, a contractor or landlord, an FM or manufacturer, and want to understand how you can become part of our golden thread community, please get in touch.